Today we're going to do a sight install on a Smith & Wesson M&P shield. As you can see, we started off by field stripping the handgun and securing the slide in a vise so that we can work on it. Next step in the process is to remove the factory front sight. I'm going to use a hammer and a punch to accomplish this. Now that the factory front sight has been removed, we'll check fitment of the aftermarket sight. As you can tell, it just starts to slide into the dovetail, but it doesn't quite go in like I want. I'm going to remove a little bit of material using a file from the bottom of the sight, of the male dovetail on the sight. Carefully put it on there, drag it across the serrations. Rotate the sight 180 degrees so that we can keep a good flat cut on the bottom of the dovetail, and repeat the process. The sight now goes about halfway in, just under finger pressure. That's about where we want it. We're going to remove it one final time. Using a Q-tip and some form of degreasing agent, in this case, gun scrubber, we're going to go ahead and clean the dovetail and the sight to ensure that there is no oil, grease, or debris to prevent the thread locker that we'll put on from curing correctly. Alright, now that it's degreased, get started back in the dovetail. Carefully using a hammer and punch. I'm going to drive it in to place and visually center it into the dovetail. Alright. Next thing we want to do, you can see I left a little bit of brass from that punch on there. I'm going to go ahead and clean that up right now with just a little bit of solvent. That's why we use brass. It's easy to clean off. Then, using the supplied red thread locker, we're going to go ahead and apply it down in the dovetail on both sides of the sight, as well as the intersection of the front sight and the slide. And give that a couple of minutes. The thread locker we used was selected partially because it has a very good wicking property. It will creep and crawl into all the crevices in the juncture there and then solidify and help hold the front sight into place. That's it for 2 or 3 or 4 minutes. Like I said, give it a chance for that to creep and crawl in there like we like. We're going to go in with a Q-tip and clean off the excessive thread locker. Alright, the front sight is now installed. It's time to move on to the rear sight. To remove the factory rear sight, and install the new rear sight. As you can see, there's a set screw in here. I'm going to try and back that off. it's not going to budge for me. Loctite has been used, so it's in there pretty good. We're going to take a soldering iron because it allows us to put heat in a very controlled location. It's already warmed up. We're going to go ahead and make contact with that screw. And we're going to hold it there for a minute or two. Let it warm everything up, soften the Loctite so that we can back that screw off. All right. Now we can use a hammer and a punch to remove the factory rear sight. A word of caution, there is a spring and a plunger on the underside of the sight. That's part of the firing pin safety system that the Smith & Wesson Shield has. We want to be careful when we're removing the sight not to lose it. Just see that little recess at the point of that punch. That's actually allows for easy assembly and disassembly. That means we're getting close to where the spring and plunger is. We want to be real careful that we don't let it fly out of the firearm. For the moment, since we want to verify that everything fits correctly before we put it together, I'm going to go ahead and remove that spring and plunger. Set it here on my vise where I won't lose it, and check the rear sight. Okay, it's pretty snug right there. Just out of habit, I've found that sometimes I get lucky, and on the other side, the sight slides in. In this case, it won't. So we're going to have to remove some material. As we showed with the front sight, we're going to take a file, set the sight on there, and drag it backwards across the serrations to remove a little bit of material. Rotate 180 degrees and repeat that process. There again, we want to do that to make sure we have a good, flat, clean cut. As you can see, we've got a fairly snug slip fit. Now we're going to remove the sight, go back to a Q-tip and some gun scrubber to make sure that everything is nice, clean, and degreased. Clean out the dovetail on the gun. And go ahead and clean off the mating surfaces of the sight itself as well. And we're ready to put this back together. Reinstall the spring in the plunger. I have found, through my personal experience, that installing the rear sight from the side opposite of the plunger tends to make my life a little easier, because I can get the sight started nice and square like I want, and then use something to depress the spring and plunger. Slide the sight into place. As with the front sight, we're going to visually center it into the slide using the supplied 50,000th hex key. Just snug that set screw. And now we're ready to apply the thread locking compound. Again, we're going to apply it at the juncture between the sight and the slide, and what little bit of dovetail we have exposed, and let that sit for about 3 or 4 minutes before we clean off the excess thread locker. Okay, we've given it 3 or 4 minutes for this to sit and creep in, just like the front sight. We're going to use Q-tips to go in and remove the red thread locking compound that did not creep into the slide and into the dovetail. And that completes the installation of sights on a Smith & Wesson M&P shield.